And with us now on set here in New York is CBS News senior political editor Steve Shigaris, CBSN political contributor and Republican strategist Leslie Sanchez, and CBS News contributor and NewYorker.com editor Nick Thompson. I would say welcome and thanks for joining us, but we've been with each other for the past year. I was about to say day and a half, but for the past year, yeah. But you know, just listening to President Obama here, let's just go ahead and talk about his speech for a moment. It was very interesting that he came out and he said, hey, we're still on the same team. People have to remember that because a lot of people, half of America woke up upset today. The other half is rejoicing.
He called it an intramural scrimmage.
Yeah. How important is it for
pretty
the
rough
president
scrimmage?
Yeah, very rough scrimmage, right?
Yeah.
How important was it for him to say that we are one? Let's unite.
It's extremely important, but there's a strong precedence for that. It reminds me of senior George Bush's letter to Bill Clinton in 1996. He left it there. It said, "You will be our president when you read this note. I'm rooting for you." And it is part of this president to president. They talk about the loneliness they have as president because it's such a unique position. And that George H.W. Bush said, I didn't have that loneliness, but I did have a lot of critics, and just be strong in that point. So there is this kind of camaraderie that does come, even though the entire nation is stunned, if not the entire globe, at what's happening. But I think you're seeing the protocols are in place, that the process of transition is starting, and that's something people can have faith in.
And I think you have to, I mean, you heard Obama say it. This is one of the hallmarks of our country, right, in our history, and it shows the world that we can do this peacefully every time, even if there's a rough campaign and just mud flying everywhere, and even if you don't agree with the next person coming in, it's a very smooth transition, and it's one of the things that I think presidents pride themselves on every time there is that transfer of power, is that we do it peacefully as a country.
I mean, we had 18 months of hell, 18 months of chaos, 18 months of our democracy looking absolutely terrible, but we have had 10 hours where we look pretty good. I mean, Trump's speech last night was solid, Hillary's speech was solid, Obama's speech was solid. We are all in it together, so let's see if we can make it to one day.
It took 18 months to get here, right?
Happier.
Let's get to some details and dig a little deeper about what happened last night. Trump's campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, was on CBS this morning, and she spoke about where Trump's campaign succeeded. Let's listen to that.
We had really navigated and survived a number of darker days here on the campaign, and we started to notice a few things, that we were becoming more competitive in some of these traditionally blue states. And these are states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania that are very attracted to the Donald Trump message of creating jobs, bringing back manufacturing jobs, certainly curbing illegal immigration, talking about fairness to the American worker, creating new jobs, and I think, frankly, just being an outsider. But what really started to crystallize is that we noticed all of the time that Hillary Clinton had a difficult time in each of these swing states getting at 45, 46, 47%, let alone the 50% plus that President Obama achieved twice. And then I think the perfect storm was completed by Obamacare premiums increasing in October.
All right, Leslie. Just to mention this Obamacare premiums, it really did come in at the 11th hour. How big of an impact was that?
Extraordinarily big impact, especially when you compound it with the Comey coming out 11 days before the election and saying that they're still looking at this new mass of, 650,000 emails. It was all of that. So despite a jobs report that looked like, the economy is still moving, we're certainly different from where we were 8 years ago, there still was that pain factor. And I think the smartest thing the Donald Trump campaign ever did was hire Kellyanne Conway. Not only was she a counterbalance and able to stabilize a lot of the erratic messaging and the tweeting and all of these things, she took control of really the message and the candidate in a way that really hadn't been done before. And to have such an historic win, and it was won by a woman campaign manager. It's just something I don't think we're going to hear a lot about, but it really is historic in itself.
And she always talked about how she wasn't afraid to say, Trump, calm down. Don't say that. She wasn't afraid to stand up to him and say, look, you're making us look bad, go back to the carpet or stick to the teleprompter.
Right, strong women all the way around, like on the top of the ticket, running the campaign. That's something we tend to see on the Democratic side. You've never really seen a woman at that level on the Republican side. And then you have your first Latina Democratic member of the Senate now who's going to go in. There's a lot of big wins when it comes around to this. So I think there's a sadness that we didn't see the first female president, but there's so many other areas where women were making a strong impact.
I mean, I don't want to take anything away from what Donald Trump did, which in a lot of ways was remarkable. If you look at what he wound up winning, Pennsylvania, a state that hasn't gone Republican since 1988, he made Minnesota competitive. He lost Minnesota by 1.5 points. Minnesota has not gone Republican since Nixon in '72, and that was a landslide. You take that away, it wasn't since Eisenhower in '56. This is not a Republican state, yet he made it extremely competitive. Why was that? I mean, if you look, there are a lot of places where Hillary Clinton, as a Democrat, should have really run up the numbers, and she was not able to do that. Places where Barack Obama did run up the numbers and put these places out of reach for Mitt Romney and for John McCain, she was unable to do that. But secondly, I think we underestimated really the passion that the voters in this country have for somebody who is going to shake things up and change. And I think we overestimated the idea that the controversies surrounding that change agent, who they saw as Donald Trump, were going to derail his eventual election. I think we felt the feeling was that he had had so many controversies. There's no way people are going to forgive him for all of these things. Yet, when you look at it and you look at the exit polling, people wanted change. They wanted somebody to go in and smash up Washington, yet at the same time, they still think unfavorably of the guy they elected, and they don't think that he's really qualified to be president, yet he won, right?
Yeah.
So I think that they're willing to put aside his negatives because there's such a desire for change. They don't feel the country is going in the right direction.
Well, we will point out that Hillary Clinton appears to be winning the popular vote of Donald Trump, the electoral vote. But I'm just curious your take on this, Nick, and that is, do you feel as though it's safe to say that Middle America put all those thoughts and doubts aside for Trump just because he is the game changer?
I think more than Middle America. I mean, I think what is absolutely extraordinary is that leading up in the last 2 weeks, there were a ton of undecided voters, many more than in previous elections. And then the last 2 weeks, every group, the undecideds in every group, broke for Donald Trump. And they broke for Donald Trump because they didn't like Hillary, they were tired of Hillary, because of the health care premiums going up, because of James Comey, and because Kellyanne Conway, strong woman, took away Donald Trump's phone and he stopped doing crazy stuff. And so in the last 2 weeks, he was a really good candidate. And everybody broke for him. And
How did we not get a sense of that, though, in the polls leading up to?
Well, I mean,
we did get a sense. There was a lot
of...
of...
We saw the tightening, but
Yes.
still going into election night.
Here's what I think happened, is I think we underestimated how her turnout was going to be lower than where Obama's was. And I think we underestimated how much higher his turnout was going to be among certain demographics. And that all that balance never really revealed itself in the pre-election polling. But in reality, it turns out, and we're talking in the right places, because you did mention that the popular vote, she's ahead. But she's going to win California by a huge margin, which is one of the most highly populated states in the country. So that's going to juice those numbers a bit. It's about the states that matter, these battleground states and other states that he wound up flipping that were traditionally blue states, right?
And there must have been something in the way the sampling of the polls was done, because people underestimated the percentage of the vote that he would get in the college-educated white people, and they underestimated the vote he would get the Latino vote, where he actually outperformed Mitt Romney.
And the women vote.
Right. These are things where he completely outperformed, and so the polls must have been set up with the wrong expectations, combined with a lot of people breaking in the right direction, combined with the fact that she still also did win the popular vote, so it wasn't like he massively crushed her in all these categories.
Before we go,
But in the national polls, yes. In the state-by-state polls, though, there were very few of these state-by-state polls where he was regularly ahead. And in fact, it was tight. It was very tight. And actually, you look at a lot of these results, and they were very tight.
Oh, very tight.
Right? And so North Carolina, that was razor thin, even in the polls. So it was like one day it'd be Hillary up, one day it would be Trump up. So
now that we have a president-elect, what does a Trump administration look like? We all have friends who voted for Trump, friends who voted for Clinton. Those who voted for Clinton are saying, oh my God, he's going to undo everything that President Obama did.
But more importantly, who does he surround himself
with? I think that this is the most important thing that the country is going to go through, because there are two very divergent paths that can go down, right? The people he surrounded himself with during the campaign are not the people that I think most people want running the government, right? He doesn't have anybody who's respected by economists who understands the economy. He doesn't have anybody who's respected by people who really think deeply about foreign affairs, advising him on foreign affairs. So he has to start, either he can go with the people who worked with him on the campaign, or he can tack, and he can try to get new people in. So the parallel that I think about the most is Ronald Reagan, who was a bit of an outsider and who didn't have as respected a group of people who came with him on the campaign. But when he came to office, you know, the top people came to him. I wrote a book about my grandfather, Paul Nitze, who served for 50 years in the government. Guy who spent his whole life devoted to this country, devoted to understanding nuclear weapons. And he had campaigned for Carter, worked for Democrats, worked for Republicans. And then when it came up to the run-up with the Reagan administration, he briefed Reagan on nuclear affairs. Reagan was impressed. Reagan said, you know what? This guy really understands throw weight. He really understands ICBMs, and he installed him, and my grandfather's willing to work for it, right?
But will Trump pull from both sides? This was
that is the question, right?
Nasty race.
And if he has partisans and he has people who are not qualified, we are in trouble. If he has the best Americans who are available to him and they are willing to serve and they are not criticized and they are not forced out by their peers, then we're going to be in a lot better shape. So this I care about a lot.
I think that is an extraordinary point. If they're not criticized and forced out by their peers, a lot of what we didn't see, and when we talk about the posts, there were advocates and evangelists for Donald Trump, and then there was the quiet group that said, we're just not going to tell you, we're going to be very private about our vote. This is a secret ballot. May not put a sign up. That silent majority that came through because they want the change, but they didn't want the criticism, whether it be neighbor to neighbor on Facebook or whatever that is. And there still is this question. You had such a revolt among the Bush appointees, for example, which would be the natural transition. People that have that bona fide experience were one step away from Senate confirmation. You know, in transitions, that's what you do. You take the Obama people, if Hillary won, and you move them to higher level positions. They have the qualifications and they understand how government moves. It would be a natural transition for Bush, or you got to look to another administration or a statewide government where they've gone through those protocols, those processes, and those vettings naturally. And you had so many Bush individuals who voted for Clinton and came out publicly and criticized. So there is that. But I do want to say just the last point. When we were thinking about the difference, there was a bit of arrogance among the Clinton campaign. You know, this kind of measuring the drapes attitude, you know, just already taking the victory lap, even though people were kind of golf clapping. This is such a stark difference, and he's exactly right. Does he put people that understand how to hit the ground running and not lose 2 years like Bill Clinton did when he first went into office, and just such a mess? The executive office is pivotal in his success.
Well, and I think what's so complicating matters are the number of Republicans inside Washington who have basically written off Trump or have spoken out against him. But I think what we saw today that was interesting was Paul Ryan got out there and said, one thing that Donald Trump did, the feat that he accomplished, was that he heard those voices that others, or voters that others weren't hearing. And I think you're going to see people like Mike Pence, people like Paul Ryan, people like Mitch McConnell say, we won across the board because these voters have given us their seal of approval. So now we've got to give back to them. We've got to make this work. And I think you're going to see them work with Trump, even though people like Paul Ryan did not really seem like he wanted to work with Trump. I think they're listening to the voters. They heard the voters, and now they're going.
You think
going
he'll
to be
survive?
some sort of effort.
You think Paul will survive?
It seemed like he was going to survive. He looked pretty good today. You know, I mean,
Well, he didn't mention my good friend Mike Pence. I think
my good friend Mike Pence. I just don't see a lot of. I don't see an uprising in the House now that they've won across the board. I think there's going to be an effort to make this work. We'll see how well that goes, but I do think there's going to be an effort to make it work over the next few months.
It's one of those really healthy, unhealthy, codependent relationships. You know, they really have to rely on each other. Because again, we talk about Bill Clinton. When he first went in, he didn't have a very strong chief of staff till Panetta came in, who could work with Congress and they could start moving that agenda forward. So not only does he have to identify individuals in at least in the top cabinet positions right away, the 4 biggest agencies and departments, but then all the 5,500 positions below that and the confirmations and getting them through, but people that have the experience, because you're already reading stories about career foreign affairs, foreign service officials who are really nervous at the State Department, who don't know if they want to stay. You have to be able to work with the career officials who keep the government moving, and there's a mutual respect that has to be built, and he's going to set that tone.
We need to remember the power of the voter, right? And at the end of the day, these people work. These are public servants, and they work for the voters and for Americans.
I mean,
and
the
so
one part of the federal government that we can be sure will continue to stay in place and keep working for him is the FBI.
Nick, I knew it was coming.
Something to
favorably up now. Well, Steve, our producers have been telling us that you need to go.
I do need to go.
But thank you for spending time with us.
Yeah,
Leslie and Nick, you're welcome to stay because this is great conversation. But thank you all for joining us.